पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे. So Amrita Kelly Mataji asked me to give Bhagavatam class today. So I was wondering what to speak on. I asked Ganapati Govinda Prabhu a couple of days ago. So he said it would be nice to hear about Rishabha Dev. So then I picked this topic about Rishabha Dev. So before reciting Bhagavatam, we say a couple of more prayers. So if any of you or some of you could repeat, that would be nice. Please repeat after me. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayanam Namaskritya
Narayanam Namaskritya
Naranchaiva Narottamam
Naranchaiva Narottamam
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Tato Jayamudirayet
Tato Jayamudirayet
Nashtaprayeshva Bhadreshu
Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
Bhagavatyuttama Shloke
Bhagavati Uttama Sloke
Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki.
Bhaktir Bhavataki Naishtaki.
So this is Canto 1 of Srimad Bhagavatam called Creation, and chapter number 3 and verse number 13. So I'm gonna increase the size a little bit so you can see it. So please repeat this after me. Ashtame Meru Devyantu
Ashtame Meru Devyam Tu
Nabherjata Urukramaha
Nabhirjata Urukramaha
Darshayan Vatmadhiranam
Darshayan Padmadhyayam
Sarvashrama Namaskritam.
Sarvashrama Namaskritam.
Put some devotees recite, please.
Ashtame Meru Devyam Tu
Ashtame Meru Devyam Tu
Nabhirjata Urukramaha
Nabherjata Urukramaha
Darshayan Vartamadhiranam
Darshayan Vatmadhiranam
Sarvashrama Namaskritam.
Sarvashrama Namaskritam. Anyone else would like to chant?
Ashtame Meru Devyam Tu
Ashtame Meru Devyam Tu
Nabhirjata Urukramaha
Nabherjata Urukramaha
Darshayan Vartamadhiranam
Darshayan
Vatmadhiranam
Sarvashrama Namaskritam.
Sarvashrama Namaskritam.
Ashtame Meru Devyam Tu
Ashtame Meru Devyam Tu
Nabherjata Urukramaha
Nabherjata Urukramaha.
Darshayan Vartamadhiranam
Darshayan Vartmadhiranam.
Sarvataman Kritam
Sarvashrama
Namaskritam.
Namaskritam.
अष्टमे मेरुदेव्यां तु
Ashtame Merudevyam tu
नाभिर्जाता उरुक्रमः
Navirjata Urukramaha.
दर्शयान् वर्त्मधीराणाम्
Darshayan Vartmadhiranam.
सर्वाश्रमा नमस्कृताम्
Namaskritam.
Ashtame Merudyam tu
Ashtame Merudevyam tu
Navirjata Urukramaha
Navirjata Urukramaha.
Darshayan Vatmadhiranam
Darshayan Vartmadhiranam.
Sarvashama Namaskritam
Sarvashrama Namaskritam.
Okay, we'll read word for word. Ashtame,
Ashtame,
the eighth of the incarnations.
the eighth of the incarnations.
Merudevyantu,
Merudevyam tu.
in the womb of Merudevi, the wife of
in
In the womb of Merudevi, the wife of
Nabehe,
Nabehe,
King Nabhi,
King
King
Nabi,
Navi
Jataha,
Jataha,
took birth,
took
took
birth.
birth
Urukramaha,
Urukramaha,
the all-powerful Lord,
the all-powerful Lord.
Darshayan,
Darshayan,
by showing,
by showing
Vartma,
Vartma,
the way,
the way,
Dhiranam,
Dhiranam,
of the perfect beings,
of the perfect beings,
Sarva,
Sarva,
all, Ashrama,
Ashrama,
orders of life,
orders of life,
Namaskritam,
Namaskritam,
honored by. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The eighth incarnation was King Rishabha, son of King Nabhi, and his wife Meru Devi. In this incarnation, the Lord showed the path of perfection, which is followed by those who have fully controlled their senses and who are honored by all orders of life. Purport. The society of human beings is naturally divided into 8 by orders and statuses of life, the 4 divisions of occupation and 4 divisions of cultural advancement. The intelligent class, the administrative class, the productive class, and the laborer class are the 4 divisions of occupation. And the student life, the householder's life, retired life, and renounced life are the 4 statuses of cultural advancement towards the path of spiritual realization. Out of these, the renounced order of life, or the order of sannyasa, is considered the highest of all. And a sannyasi is constitutionally the spiritual master for all the orders and divisions. In the sannyasa order also, there are 4 stages of upliftment toward perfection. These stages are called Kutichaka, Bahudaka, Parivrajaka Acharya, and Paramahamsa. The Paramahamsa stage of life is the highest stage of perfection. This order of life is respected by all others. Maharaja Rishabha, the son of King Nabhi and Meru Devi, was an incarnation of the Lord, and he instructed his sons to follow the path of perfection by tapasya, which sanctifies one's existence and enables one to attain the stage of spiritual happiness, which is eternal and ever increasing. Every living being is searching after happiness, but no one knows where eternal and unlimited happiness is obtainable. Foolish men seek after material sense pleasure as a substitute for real happiness, but such foolish men forget that temporary so-called happiness derived from sense pleasures is also enjoyed by the dogs and hogs. No animal, bird or beast is bereft of the sense pleasure. In every species of life, including the human form of life, such happiness is immensely obtainable. The human form of life, however, is not meant for such cheap happiness. The human life is meant for attaining eternal and unlimited happiness by spiritual realization. This spiritual realization is obtainable by tapasya, or undergoing voluntarily the path of penance and abstinence from material pleasure. Those who have been trained for abstinence in material pleasures are called dhira, or men undisturbed by the senses. Only these dhiras can accept the orders of sannyasa, and they can gradually rise to the status of the Paramahamsa, which is adored by all members of society. King Rishabha propagated this mission, and at the last stage, he became completely aloof from the material bodily needs, which is a rare stage not to be imitated by foolish men, but to be worshipped by all. Are you still able to hear me okay?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay, because something popped up saying internet connection is not stable. All right, so actually the topic of Rishabha Deva comes in detail in 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. However, the incarnations of the Lord are mentioned a couple of times in the first 2 cantos. So this is one place in the 3rd chapter of 1st canto. So does anyone know who is speaking this chapter, 3rd chapter of 1st canto? Okay, I take that as no. So this chapter is spoken by Suta Goswami to the sages of Naimisharanya. Bhagavatam is spoken by, we say, by Shukadeva Goswami to Maharaja Parikshit. But Bhagavatam is spoken multiple times within the Bhagavatam. Within Srimad Bhagavatam, you hear Bhagavatam being spoken many times by different speakers. So the Bhagavatam, it is coming in the disciplic succession. It is spoken by Lord Krishna himself unto Lord Brahma. Then Brahma spoke it to Narada, Narada spoke it to Vyasa, and Vyasa spoke it to Shukadeva Goswami, and Shukadeva Goswami has spoken to Maharaja Parikshit. And while Maharaja Parikshit was hearing, there are other students in the class. And one of the students was Suta Goswami. And Suta Goswami is speaking this Bhagavatam to the sages in the forest of Naimisharanya. So it began by the sages of Naimisharanya asking various questions to Suta Goswami. And Suta Goswami has been answering the questions of the sages. So the 1st canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is a preface to the entire Srimad Bhagavatam. Just like in the Bhagavad Gita, 1st chapter is setting the scene for the whole Bhagavad Gita. The 1st chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is setting the scene for the rest of the Bhagavad Gita. So the Bhagavatam also, the 1st canto is like a preface. And in the 2nd canto, the meeting of Shukadeva and Parikshit. Shukadeva starts speaking to Parikshit Maharaj in the 2nd canto. Of course, the meeting happens towards the end of the 1st canto. So now I could have spoken directly from the 5th canto, but my Guru Maharaj has instructed me, according to the instruction of Srila Prabhupada, that depending on the audience, particularly when we have a general session which is open to everybody, it is better to speak from the first two cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam and make that as the basis. And the reason is, first two cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, they are the lotus feet of Krishna. They are called Pada Padma. In the Padma Purana, it gives the description of Srimad Bhagavatam. The different cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam are different limbs of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We just finished Bhadra Purnima. It is very auspicious and devotees have done a great job distributing Srimad Bhagavatam. And Srimad Bhagavatam is Krishna himself. Krishne svadamo pagate dharmajnanadivisaha kalau nashtadrishamesha puranar kodunoditaha. So when Krishna left this world, he came back in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam. And when we have Srimad Bhagavatam in our house, it is like having Krishna in our house. And the principles of Srimad Bhagavatam is the guiding light for humanity in this age of Kali Yuga. And this Bhagavatam has to be studied systematically. Srila Prabhupada speaks at the beginning in the preface, I believe, either preface or introduction, that the only qualification that we need is we have to systematically study the Srimad Bhagavatam. Particularly from Canto 3 onwards, we need to develop certain qualifications and rise to the platform of mode of goodness to be able to properly grasp from third canto onwards. But first two cantos, Srila Prabhupada says all of us can read. So we can base our study, recitation, things like this. The foundation will be first two cantos, and we can go into the principles here and there about the rest of the canto, no problem. But it is recommended to go systematically, particularly after canto number 2. It is important to follow the 4 regulative principles in a proper way, particularly to get into the details from third canto onwards. So that is the reason I have chosen this one. And it is also mentioned besides here, in the second canto also, chapter number 7 also speaks about various incarnations. So there Shukadeva is talking to Maharaja Parikshit, and there's also a brief description again about Rishabha Deva. I will just read that particular verse. 1 second. So this is a picture of Lord Rishabha Deva here. He's instructing his sons, and we'll get into that topic in here a little bit. So this is another one, 2:7-10. Nabhera savrushabha asa sudevi sunur yo vai chachara samadrig jada yoga charyam yat paramahamsyam rishaya padamamananti swasta prashanta karana parimukta sangaha. The Lord appeared as the son of Sudevi, the wife of King Nabhi, and was known as Rishabha Deva. He performed materialistic yoga to equibalance the mind. This stage is also accepted as the highest perfectional situation of liberation, wherein one is situated in oneself and is completely satisfied. So this is another mention of Rishabha Deva in Canto 2, Chapter 7. So here, if you have observed, the name of the mother is mentioned as Sudevi, whereas in the previous verse, it was mentioned as Meru Devi. Let me see if I can get a pointer here. I think I could have more spotlight. Yes. No. Okay. So here it is mentioned as Meru Devi, but in the next subsequent slide, is mentioned as Sudevi. So there are multiple opinions on this one, but Srila Prabhupada is clear that Sudevi and Meru Devi, they are the same person, it is just a different name. So I wanted to point that out in case someone has noticed that. So then going to the purport that we have read, Rishabha Deva particularly, he has showed the path of perfection, and he has taken up the highest order of cultural path, cultural division, or we can also in other places Srila Prabhupada calls it as spiritual division. There are 4 social divisions, there are 4 spiritual divisions, you could say. So social divisions are meant to live in this material world. Those are the 4 occupations. That is Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. The intellectual class, the administrative class, the business class and the working class. These are the occupational divisions, or you could also call them social divisions. And then there's cultural divisions, are spiritual divisions, those divisions which are helpful for spiritual advancement. And these are Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha and Sannyasa. So the student life, the householder life, the retired life and the renounced order of life. Nanda Gopal Prabhu, are you able to hear okay, or is there any noise in the background?
There is some noise in the background, but I think your voice is fine.
Okay, thank you. I have my headphones on, but there is some carpet installation going on. I think they're vacuuming. I apologize. So now these 4, these divisions, they go on in parallel, right? So we may be a grihastha and then working in a particular occupation. So both of them, they go in parallel. So however, when it comes to the retired life and sannyasa life, actually I'll take back what I said. When I say it goes back in parallel, it is particularly for the grihasthas, because only grihastha is the only one who takes on an occupation. Brahmachari is just studying with the spiritual master. Vanaprastha is already retired, and sannyasi is also not engaged in these social occupations, right? So that the particularly for the grihasthas, it's a parallel line. But the other 3, they are kind of focused on their spiritual path. The spiritual division takes over. And now Rishabha Deva, he is actually Krishna himself. He took the incarnation of Krishna because he was requested to, he was actually asked a boon by, here it is said, he was born in the womb of Nabhi and Meru Devi. So Nabhi, he performs a sacrifice, he engages Brahmanas to perform a sacrifice, and then the Supreme Lord appears. And then the Brahmanas, they say, this King Nabhi, he wants a son like you. And then Krishna says, you cannot get a son like me because there is no one like me. Then I will become your son. And Krishna, he becomes a son. He comes in the form of Rishabha Deva in the womb of Meru Devi. And right from his birth, he manifests his qualities as the Supreme Lord, particularly his bodily identity. There are different symptoms in his body, particularly on the lotus feet of the Lord. You will find various symbols. They could observe these symbols in Rishabha Deva. So he was Krishna himself possessing great qualities. However, he specifically wanted to show the path of renounced order of life, sannyasa. And Srila Prabhupada writes that sannyasa, a sannyasi, is the spiritual master of all the orders of the society, of all the occupations, the occupational divisions, as well as the spiritual divisions, or the cultural divisions. A sannyasi is the teacher for all of them. So this is an important principle for us to understand. We have different authorities, right? When he say a sannyasi is the spiritual master, we may be going to work, there's authority at work in our occupational duty. Or we may be in a family, we have a guide in the family, the father, mother. And even in our spiritual life, we have authorities. We have temple president, we have the GBC, and we have our Diksha Guru, and we have other sannyasis or other spiritual teachers who give us shiksha. So we have all these divisions, right? And they're all authorities. And we have to follow, we have to understand the authorities of these different personalities. And in all these, we also see here Srila Prabhupada is saying, for all the divisions, a sannyasi is also, a sannyasi is a spiritual master. Sannyasi should also be respected and accepted like this. And within the order, within the sannyasi also, there are divisions of the sannyasa order. And they are Kutichaka, Bahudaka, Parivrajaka Acharya, and Paramahamsa. Looks like there's a chat message. I want to see if it's from me. So, Kutichaka, Bahudaka, Parivrajaka Acharya, and Paramahamsa. So these are the 4 divisions within sannyasa order. So Kutichaka means once a person takes sannyas, then he's living in, one place in his own little ashram. He's accepting food by living in there. Bahudaka means he goes to multiple places. He goes to multiple places and he acquires, prasadam, bhoga, like that. And then Parivrajaka Acharya is somebody who travels all around and he preaches, traveling all around and preaching Krishna consciousness. This is Parivrajaka Acharya. And Paramahamsa, this is the highest stage. And there are no social obligations for a Paramahamsa. He is completely aloof. He may not seemingly also following any regulations of the Shastra, regulations of the society. And because he is no longer bound by the principles of the society anymore. He's above all these things. So that is the Paramahamsa stage. Now, in the Srila Prabhupada also, he particularly talks about tapasya in this purport. So this is one thing that Rishabha Deva was emphasizing in his instructions. So Rishabha Deva, he also instructed his 100 sons. He had 100 sons. And out of them, we also know about Bharata Maharaja. And Bharata Maharaja was the oldest. And there were also Navayogendras, and they come later in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. These Navayogendras, they became Bhagavatas, Paramahamsas, and they preached Bhagavatam as well. And some of them, they became the kings. And some of them became Brahmanas. And you could see here, children of Kshatriya, they became Brahmanas. They became preachers of Srimad Bhagavatam, some of them. And some of them became the kings ruling the world. And among the kings, Bharata Maharaj, he was the leader for the rest of them. And he is the oldest son of Rishabha Deva. And in this purport, Srila Prabhupada is also talking about tapasya. This word tapa, what does the word tapa mean? What does it mean to all of you? Can anyone explain this word tapa?
Austerity?
Austerity. Tapa means austerity. So austerity means voluntarily taking some suffering upon ourselves. Can you give some examples of austerity?
Fasting.
Fasting, very nice. Fasting.
For me to finish my 16 rounds is also an austerity.
Yes, it is actually. Srila Prabhupada says this following 4 regulative principles in chanting. This is also tapasya. Yes.
Waking up early in the morning may be an austerity.
Yes, wonderful. That's very difficult, right? Waking up early in the morning, getting out of the bed. Spiritual master is saying, wake up, wake up. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya. He is trying to open our eyes With the torchlight of knowledge, he opens our darkened eyes. Wake up, wake up. No, Guru Maharaj, snooze. I want to sleep a little more. Yes, it is an austerity. Anyone else? More?
The austerities that we observe during the month of Kartik or during the month of Purushottam, sleeping on the floor.
Yes, yes. Giving up the
our,
soft bed. Yeah.
Giving up our favorite foods for the pleasure of the Lord.
Yes. Yes.
Celibacy.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Observing celibacy.
Yes, yes. Great. These are all wonderful examples of tapasya, austerities, right? And this is what Srila Prabhupada is saying. However, this tapasya is for who? Can animals do tapasya?
Ongoing.
No, it is for human beings, particularly for human beings. Now, why do we want to abstain and why do we want to give up our happiness by voluntarily taking up this suffering? Isn't that odd? I mean, this human life is short and just enjoy. Why do we want, this seems so pessimistic and so self-torturing. Why do we want to do tapasya?
Because you want to achieve eternal happiness.
Yes, this point of to attain eternal happiness. It seems that we are against happiness, right? Voluntary suffering means, why do you want to suffer? Nobody wants to suffer. We want to be happy. But we want to take this suffering to obtain higher and permanent happiness. There is no doubt that there is happiness in the material world. But that happiness in the material world, it has two characteristics. One is, it is temporary. You cannot perpetually have material happiness. Even though if we want, we are forced not to have. Say, for example, one of you mentioned you abstain from your favorite food. Okay, you can voluntarily abstain. But at some point, even if we eat, we cannot digest when we become old. And when we are diseased, if we eat, actually it causes more problems. So even if we want, we cannot. This is the or even sometimes if we want, we cannot obtain it. We cannot obtain, or there is inability to enjoy. And another side of it is dukkaushadam tadapi dukkham. Prahlad Maharaj says, we want to enjoy happiness to avoid suffering and take upon some things to feel good. But Prahlad Maharaj said, dukkaushadam tadapi dukkham. That medicine that we are trying to get in order to avoid suffering actually is also leads to more suffering. So in other words, the happiness that we are trying to get in this material world will be cause of bondage, because that taste that we get for happiness leads to attachment, and that attachment keeps us bound to this material world. And keeping us bound to this material world, it is a package. It comes with some other things. There's a fine print. That is birth, death, old age, and disease. You want to take this medicine, but these are the side effects. You want to get this happiness, this bottle of happiness, and in the fine print, you will see the side effects of this happiness are birth, death, old age, and disease. And all of them are suffering. A child coming out from the womb of the mother or living in the womb of the mother is suffering. And death is suffering, old age is suffering, and disease is suffering. So this happiness comes with these things. So which intelligent person wants this happiness, which has all these side effects, which are perpetual, and that happiness we are getting is only temporary. So therefore, Rishabha recommends, do tapasya to get happiness. Yes, a materialist is seeking happiness, a spiritualist is also seeking happiness. But the happiness that we are seeking, the results are permanent, and even the process in the beginning, it may seem difficult, but eventually it's not. Actually, we are able to feel, I am no longer feeling bad if I don't get this material happiness. Say, for example, somebody is getting pleasure in eating meat. Now, those who are giving up initially, it may be difficult, but later, I don't feel a problem. I don't see that it's a problem. Actually, I'm happy eating prasadam. Getting up in the morning may be a problem in the beginning, but later, no, actually, I feel good. Rest of my day is wonderful. So now we see that tapasya also, it's no longer a suffering because it becomes a habit. So even the journey doesn't feel so difficult. But however, that's only possible when there is Krishna involved in it. Even tapasyas that we do without Krishna, then they are useless. And if we are worshipping Krishna, then what is tapasya? You don't have to even abstain from eating certain foods. If they are prasadam, you can take prasadam. And it seems relishable. Krishna consciousness is so wonderful. Aradate yadi hari tapasa tapasya kim, naradate yadi hari tapasa tapasya kim. If you are worshipping Krishna, then why do you need all these hard tapasyas? And if you are not worshipping Krishna, what is the use of all these tapasyas? So, the goal of this tapasya is Krishna. This is very important to understand. And some people may say they are more austere than us, and we'll find people who are much more austere than the devotees. But if there is no Krishna involved in it, then there's no point of that austerity. So the goal of this tapasya is to attain Krishna. And only when we attain Krishna, then we really attain the true happiness. Otherwise, then there is no happiness without Krishna. Without Krishna, we can go up to the point of Brahma Jyoti, but even there, because of lack of devotion to the lotus feet of the Lord, we have to fall down again. Because a living entity is a pleasure-seeking, Anandamayo Bhyasat, and this is actually referring to the Lord. The Lord is Anandamaya, and we are part and parcels of the Lord, so therefore we are also Satchidananda. We also have the tendency to be happy. And the happiness in Brahma Jyoti is only to be away from material suffering. Yes, we'll feel happy to be having no suffering, but that's kind of more like a neutral position. And therefore, we want that happiness, we come back to have some relationship with somebody in the material world. So therefore, the goal of these tapasyas is to obtain Krishna. And these tapasyas, Krishna has given us this process of bhakti yoga. So in bhakti yoga, those tapasya we perform in bhakti yoga, they're all related to Krishna bhakti. Then the tapasya also becomes very easy to practice. Otherwise, just tapasya will not help without bhakti. And this is more clearly discussed later in the 6th canto of Bhagavatam, where Prahlad Maharaj and Shukadeva Goswami, they are having a conversation. Like, what is the path? When Prahlad Maharaj hears in 5th canto that there's a lot of suffering in these hellish planets, Prahlad Maharaj becomes very worried. Sorry, not Prahlad Maharaj, Parikshit Maharaj becomes worried. Then he asks Shukadeva Goswami, what is the way out? What is the way out of, how do we get out of this suffering? Because we perform sinful activities and we have to go to different kinds of hell. So then Shukadeva Goswami says, you have to undergo atonement. Then Parikshit Maharaj says, what is the use of this atonement? Because even after atonement, people end up doing the same thing again. So Shukadeva Goswami there was testing Prahlad Maharaj, and later Shukadeva Goswami suggests tapasya, brahmacharya and all these things. Then Parikshit Maharaj was still not happy. Then later he says, Kechit kevalaya bhaktya. Means the actual process is the process of devotional service. And by this process of devotional service, and Srila Prabhupada quotes this in the Nectar of Instruction also, verse number 1 of Nectar of Instruction, he describes what I have just mentioned as well. So there he says the process is to take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master, and then follow this process, which includes some tapasya, which is the 4 regulative principles, as well as the chanting that some of you have mentioned. So these are the things that we follow. It is, and in this purport, when this discussion comes, some people may become offended, is that we should not be like animals, the birds and bees. So they have no regulations. What animals, birds and bees, they are trying to obtain is 4 things. Ahara nidra bhayamaitunam cha. These 4 things, they are there for animals and human beings. Means eating, ahara is eating. They are also acquiring their food and we are also eating. But we work very hard to eat. We have to have enough bank balance, and the government also supporting in the form of social security. But animals, they just acquire the food they want. Mostly on the same day, they go get their food and Krishna is helping them. Ahara, nidra, they're also sleeping, we are also sleeping. Ahara, nidra, bhaya. Bhaya means fear. So out of this fear, we have fear from various different sources. We have fear. So therefore, because of the fear of natural calamities, we build a house, and we have fear of thieves and other living entities. We put security system in our house. And in order to defend ourselves, we take so many measures. And animals also, they defend themselves. They build a small nest in a tree. They find their own little spot. And the dogs, they find their spot and they mark their areas. And if you go into their area, they bark at you, trying to defend themselves. So these measures are there in animals as well. Ahara, nidra, sleeping is there. Bhaya is there. Maithuna. Maithuna means indulging in bodily pleasure, sexual activities. So this is also there in the animals and human beings. However, this aspect, it appears sometimes that human beings are more degraded in this area, because animals, birds and bees, they only mate when there is a particular season. There's a mating season. But human beings, they have no restrictions. So particularly in a degraded state, there are no restrictions. And as the civilization progresses, there's more degradation. So they are doing these things to get some happiness, to get some pleasure. Again, there is this higher pleasure in Krishna consciousness in the spiritual world if we follow the practice of Krishna consciousness. So we also, human being also is getting these 3 things. It's not that human being is avoiding these things, but we do them in a regulated way by keeping Krishna as the center of our life. And when we do in that manner, then we are using proper human life in a proper way. Otherwise, we are not practicing the proper dharma. And there's a saying, dharmena vihina pashubir samana. If we don't follow this dharma, then there's no difference between human being and an animal. And Lord Rishabha, in order to emphasize this, he gave wonderful instructions. And among those instructions, the main point is tapasya, and tapasya has to be performed for the purpose of Krishna consciousness, to advance for the sake of self-realization. And even in the process of tapasya, we may also get mystic powers. But those mystic powers also, a devotee, Rishabha rejected those mystic powers, even though he had so many mystic powers because of his tapasya. So similarly, a devotee also, Srila Prabhupada also had a lot of powers. But he did not use those powers to attract followers. He based it upon the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, not on this cheap so-called magic and all these tricks. So that's another thing we find in the example of Rishabha and the Acharyas and Srila Prabhupada as well. So we can all pray to Lord Rishabha to properly execute Krishna consciousness and give us strength also to perform needed austerities in Krishna consciousness. So I'll stop here and I'll open up for anyone who may have some questions or comments.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you very much for enlivening class. Near the beginning of the class, you gave basically a hierarchy, if I can use that word, where you said that how Bhagavatam was spoken from Krishna to Lord Brahma to and then Vyasadeva and then I think Sukadeva Goswami. So my
Mhm.
question is that Prabhu, I have heard, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there was some way Lord Ganesha also was involved when Vyasadeva was speaking and he wrote Bhagavatam. So my question is that if that is true, then why, while describing hierarchy, we don't mention Lord Ganesha? And if it's not true, then please enlighten me. Thank you.
Interesting. Yeah, good question. I never heard this question. So I can share some of my thoughts. It may not be a perfect answer you're looking for. So yes, Ganesha, he was actually the scribe. Um, he was writing when Vyasadeva was speaking. What we are talking about is the transmission process, right? So we find that the knowledge has been transmitted. For example, when Sutta Goswami was listening to Shukadeva Goswami was speaking to Maharaja Parikshit as the primary student, but there's so many of them were hearing, right? But not all of them took on the task of going and preaching that subject matter, right? So it could be probably because we don't mention because we don't find, at least in Bhagavatam, where Ganesha is speaking Bhagavatam again. I don't know there. I don't know. At least I haven't heard of a tradition where Lord Ganesha was preaching Srimad Bhagavatam. Yeah, I could be wrong. There may be something that I don't know, but at least I haven't heard that. So I would say probably that would be the reason why we do not mention that.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Then I had a second question near the middle or end of the class in the slideshow. You mentioned or showed the 4 points. Uh, I may not pronounce this correctly. Bodhicha, few others, and last one was Paramhamsa. So my question is focused on Paramhamsa. Prabhu, in Kali Yuga, no, myself is like I can speak for myself that I am degraded and I may not be in the forecast as well, lower than that. So how person like me who has a degraded consciousness would ever realize that he or he is dealing with a Paramhamsa? So what are the qualities of Paramhamsa? You briefly touched upon it, but if you can speak something more on that.
Good question. First of all, thank you. I think it's humility on your part to call yourself degraded. Actually, I found you as a wonderful devotee. Your mode of service, your discipline, and yes, in terms of Paramahamsa, Hamsa is a swan, and the qualities of Hamsa, Srila Prabhupada explains one time. If you have milk, and this example is so apt because you're doing wonderful service for devotees and bringing everybody milk. And sometimes it happens, and particularly if you've been in India, you're used to purchasing milk. Sometimes they add a lot of water to the milk. And a swan will take the milk and leave the water. It can separate the milk from the water. And so it can take the essence and leave the other thing. So Paramahamsas, they're completely focused on Krishna. No nonsense, everything there. Even if it is mixed with something, they know how to take just the essence, the main substance. So they are purely connected with Krishna like that. And another thing about Hamsa Swan is it is found in beautiful waters, in nice lakes and everything. The opposite is a crow, where it is always seeking filthy matter. But Paramahamsas, they are always observed in the topics of Krishna. But externally, they may be seemingly not following the society, the norms of the society. Like Rishabha Deva, he was going naked and he was seemingly unclean, and he would pass urine and stool just where he's sitting, and he would do that to repulse those materialistic people, so they wouldn't go. They would see him that as somebody, who is just not somebody who you would want to associate with. Of course, not all Paramahamsas may be doing this. This is an extreme example I'm giving you. So in an Avadhuta type of circumstance also, you may find a Paramahamsa. And a Paramahamsa is also can seclude himself in that stage and completely absorbed himself. Whereas Parivrajaka stage is where there's lots of preaching going on. Srila Prabhupada would also say at some point that he would want to retire and just, focus on absorption in the Lord. I'm sorry for that noise. And also write books and everything. So Prabhupada wanted to do that as well. So these are, we can talk a lot more about Paramahamsa, but these are some of the things. So we cannot judge a Paramahamsa. I'll stop my video and go out so that it's not there. So Paramahamsa, he is always engaged in Krishna consciousness. And we may not identify Paramahamsa sometimes, if we are judgmental, maybe say we have our regulations, keep clean, take a nice bath, and shave yourself nicely. So we may have all these regulations, and we may somebody with a long beard and not taking baths and all those things, but that person may be a Paramahamsa, right? So, but he is above these regulations, and of course, it's very rare to come across somebody like that, but to come across a Paramahamsa. So, in general, it's very hard to find those Paramahamsas, but they do exist. They were there in our Sampradaya as well. I think Vamshidas Babaji, he's one example.
Prabhuji, Madhvendra Puri also, that reminded me a verse which says that I bid farewell to all my 3 times sandhyas and bathing also every day. You remember that verse?
Yes. Sandhya Vandana Bhadramastu Bhavatu Bhavatu. Yes. So this Srila Prabhupada mentions this in 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. In one of the verses, he cites this verse. Yes, good example. So like that, right? So, but we have to follow regulations, and as we follow proper regulations, eventually, then that stage is possible.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Nandagopal Prabhu. Any other devotees? Any comments, questions? Amrita Keli Mataji has her hand up. I don't know if it was from before or she has anything to say.
I was trying to give you a thumbs up, and by mistake, this raised hand. The only thing I would have, we were talking, right? So Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, he secluded himself,
Wonderful example. Yes, Mataji,
He did
please.
not want disciples, and Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, before he got that name, he had to come to the point of saying, I'm going to commit suicide if you don't give me initiation. He did not want to have anything to do with the material world. So he is an example of a Paramhamsa.
Yes.
And Narad Muni is an example of a Parivajacharya, right? Going around preaching to everybody. So
yeah.
And
Narada Muni is also Paramahamsa, but he can be Parivrajacharya as well. Like for Srila Prabhupada, we say Jayavam Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya. We add both of them. So yeah.
But from in this material world, from our naked eyes, with imperfect senses, and illusion and conditioned lifestyle, we do not have the ability to identify one if we see one. So it's, for us to be on the safe side, it's better to stick in the, association of, Uttamadhikaris.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so it will be difficult for us to identify. So we depend on more advanced devotees before we kind of do our own analysis. So it's better we accept the guidance of very advanced devotees if we have to determine whether someone is a Paramahamsa or not. Good point. Yeah, and I really like that Gaur Kishodas Babaji Maharaj example. That's very excellent example.
Very nice class, Prabhuji.
Thank you very much, Amata Kelly Mataji, for engaging me in this service.
So Dhanya Gopi is sleeping. She's generally my Zoom chat scribe. I don't know how to put a thumbs up on this window.
Yeah, the children are more advanced in using in Yukta Vairagya. Using this technology. Yeah. So if there are no other comments or questions, we have only 1 or 2 minutes left. Thank you very much, everybody. And today is the wonderful Ratha Yatra festival, and we can all get in the mood, of worshipping Jagannath today. And this is so wonderful festival, and the opportunity we have here to be able to have darshan of Jagannath and bring him into our hearts today. And this is particularly Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Ratha Yatra is his wonderful favorite festival, that in Jagannath Puri, actually as soon as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saw Jagannath, he fainted. The very first time he saw Jagannath in Jagannath Puri. So such is the devotion of the Lord for Jagannath. And we can pray to Lord Chaitanya that we will have some devotion to Lord Jagannath. And just like the gopis, they wanted to pull Lord Jagannath and take him to Vrindavan, we may also pray that he will come into our hearts and cleanse our hearts, so that we can have some devotion and the strength to do proper tapasya to get his mercy and shelter. So thank you very much, all the devotees, for your participation today. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Very nice class.
Prabhuji, very
Thank
nice
you,
class.
Mataji.
This is the best of class.
Thank you. Who is speaking? Who is that? Who is that?
Tulsi.
Your
I'm
name is
Tulsi.
Tulsi. You got such wonderful name. I have to see you sometime, Tulsi. Thank you for your encouragement. I'm sure you're much better devotee than me to glorify me.
Please bless her, Prabhuji.
Please bless me, Prabhuji.
Yes. Thank you. I'll pray for you. I don't know if I'm advanced enough to bless you, but I'll pray that Lord gives you a lot of devotion and you can inspire us.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank
This
you.
is the Thank
Hare
you, Prabhuji.
Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna, Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha
Sarvabhyascha
Tata Singh
Kalpatarubyascha
Pati Pavani
Pattanamavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo
Srila
Namo
Prabhupada
Namaha.
ki jai.
Jai.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna.